Hey everyone, today we're covering what not to do in a wheel loader. So these are some of the top mistakes that we've seen on our site, so check this out. Okay everyone, so this episode's what not to do in a wheel loader. So we've got a lot of requests, or people giving us tips, I should say, on what some mistakes they've seen. So we thought we'd put together, we've never done a video like this, we thought it'd be really valuable. At the end of this, please comment below. We'd love to hear anything that you guys have seen. As I've always said, we're not experts. We just kind of show you what we've learned. We've already done our pre-op inspection around the equipment. We already know our site, everything like that. We have other videos, wheel loader how to operate video is a 101. We're not going over any of that. There's a pre-op video as well that you can see a pre-op inspection. So today we'll go over kind of about 5 things that we've seen. So lots of different, I think people are going to give tips and what they've seen out on sites. We're going to kind of go over some of the basics. So most obviously with the wheel loader, typically wheel loaders are going to be picking up material, loading it into something or moving it around a site. So that usually means you're going off of one stockpile. So the first tip there is making sure that your blade, you don't have that blade angle too steep where you're actually going into the ground underneath the stockpile. So a good example is if you did have a pile of gravel or whatever sitting on top of packed dirt, if you open that blade up too much, you are going to get a load of black dirt in there with your gravel, which obviously you don't want. Now on our site, we're very sandy here, so but it's still good. It's going to show you kind of what that looks like. So the key is as you're going up, I'm coming up to my site right there, just making sure my bucket's flat. If this is where adjusting that blade angle, if I was to go too much, even down just a little bit, and I touch the ground, you're gonna see I just went into that ground and I created a divot and basically got underneath that. So that is probably the first thing. I'm gonna fill this back in here. I always tell new operators that it's gonna be better to start with, it'd be better to have your blade up a little bit or even be above the ground than having it down. If you're down low and you have that blade open at all, that's going to cause you to dig in. And we've seen it pretty bad for new operators out here where if they start even back too far, and I go like that, it's going to just drive me down into the ground there. And then eventually my wheels even catch up, it even gets worse. So that's one of the keys there for a new operator is just making sure that you're keeping that blade relatively level to the ground. Best way I found, and again on our machines we actually can see the blade angle. We put little red lines on there, but really the top of most buckets will have a matching line to the blade angle down there. So you bring that down where it's flat. Sometimes I'll even let it touch the ground. I may pull back a little bit on it, but then you're gonna be able to go straight in. You'll see what happens here though with me, without correcting that little divot, what happens? My tires go into that, and that sinks you down even worse. So that's the key is it only gets worse throughout the day. If you do not fix that, you're gonna make it worse for the next operator. You're gonna have a bunch of these divots in there. So that is that. That's number one, I would say, is making sure your blade angle is flat and you don't let that dig into the ground. I'm gonna slide over here a little bit to show the next one. The next one's really about your tire, your traction and spinning tires, or I should say lack of spinning. Clearly you do not want to be spinning tires. So there's a couple of things that's going to cause. One is going to cause unnecessary wear on your tires. So you do not want to keep just spinning those tires with this much weight on them. That'll cause your life of that tire to be dramatically shorter. So if you don't own that machine, you're not paying for it. Someone's not going to be happy. So that's the key. The second is you're going to see it's actually going to spin up, and that actually, just like I just made a divot over there, it's going to make it even worse. So if I drive straight in here, you'll notice right here, if I hit my tires, you'll see they're just spinning. I got one, and you'll see what that's doing. So the key is trying to limit that. Because what happens here is after I get a load, when I back up, you're gonna see my machine is doing that. You're gonna drive over those. It's extremely bad at our site with it being sand because it's very easy. I think it's good to demonstrate this because it shows you how bad it can be in a soft material. But even in a compact material, your tires are still going to get that, it's going to wear them down, and it will create some of those little divots there. So you want to be careful not to basically spin the tires or cause that at all. Now the key on your machine, I'm going to flatten this out just a little bit. Almost all equipment's going to have, at least newer equipment's going to have some form of traction control. So typically on Komatsu, there's just a switch over here and go for max. You know, it really depends on the soil that you're going to be in. Typically auto is where you want to be. That's not going to keep it from spinning at all. So when I'm in auto right now, if I go forward here, the key is just going in, and this is where you're going to be looking at your front tires. If you see those are starting to spin at all, and especially with, I'm in a very soft material, this is where I can actually reduce my traction control there, and it won't spin them as easy. But I can see it while I'm scooping, while I'm pulling this up and in. I'm just making sure I'm maintaining the forward motion without spinning the tires. Depending on the soil you're in, that's what's going to change it for you. A sand is going to spin a lot easier than a compact, like a black dirt, or even if you're in a hard pavement like concrete. So that's the second piece. Practice that. That's something that a good operator, if you can get really good at getting a really full bucket without spinning those tires, a lot of that is your technique, as well as when you're picking up that boom to go into that pile. What that's doing is that's putting downward pressure on your front tire, so it's giving you a little bit more traction. So if you're in a firm ground, that's going to actually keep you from spinning them as much because you're putting more pressure down onto those front tires. I'm going to put this back in auto. The next tip is really about driving around with really center of gravity. So what you'll see a lot of new operators do, so typically in wheel loader, skid steer, whatever you're using that has a high pivot point, I should say, your center of gravity, that raises that. So knowing where the center of gravity is, if I raise this up above my machine, this is where I'm at most at risk. So whether or not, if I push forward, you'll see how the whole machine is going to sway around. So a couple things is knowing, as I turn that machine, my entire center of gravity is pivoting to that left. So the only time you're really going to get in trouble in a wheel loader is when you're up high like this with a loaded bucket, because I can shift this center of gravity very easily. And I can feel, especially on a rubber tire machine, that air pressure, you'll feel it going one way or the other. So ideally, you want to be careful anytime that bucket is above your head. So you're going to inch forward slowly. And this is where I tell you don't want to have operators that are trying to drive up the mound. If I start driving up the mound while I'm angling, you'll see this can get it can get a little uneasy for an operator too. But this is where you're going to get in trouble in a wheel loader, is if you're trying to either reverse, position the machine, do a lot of different steering while you're up high like that. Typically, when I'm approaching, either if it's going to be a dump truck, if it's going to be another pile you're loading, you try and get turned around there so you're approaching it generally pretty straight. That puts that center of gravity right in the center of the machine, and then you're going to go up and you'll be able to dump. So again, that's just understanding center of gravity. The more you're down low, below your cab, the safer that machine is going to be. It's very tough to get in any trouble when you have all that weight down low in front of you. You've got the engine behind you, is that counteracting, so that center of gravity is right in the center and the machines are very stable. So this is generally how you want to look. So number 4 is float, and each machine is a little bit different with float. But I've seen this with operators that can get pretty aggressive with that joystick control. Typically, to engage a float, let me back up here and show you. To do float on the ground, if I just set this bucket down and I just take my right hand and put that forward, it locks it forward, I'll basically disengage the hydraulics to the boom. So I can float the blade and I can roll it if I want, but it's the hydraulic cylinder for the boom is disengaged. Now that's the appropriate way to do it. What I've seen with new operators, when they're really moving fast and trying to load cycle really quickly, there's nothing prohibiting this bucket from going, or the arm going, to float when you're up high like this. So a situation here I've seen, and I'll demonstrate it, if I just push right hand forward really hard like I was trying to bring the boom down quickly and I go too far, it'll float, it'll disengage, so it's going to drop. And I'll do it here, demonstrate here in a sec. And you'll see. That's what that does. So that would keep bringing that all the way down. And I've seen it all the way where it drops down to the ground. And it's hard on the machine, obviously, but that's why you want to be careful. I can do it a little bit higher here if I'm right above and it's just going to drop into the pile. You want to be careful when you're trying to go really fast so you don't accidentally engage that float feature. I've seen this happen in skid steers too, so understanding that. The final tip and trick here is pretty simple. I call it just knowing your machine. So what I mean by that is I've seen operators that will jump in a machine and there's certain things that, like shifting. You know, I tell operators, new operators, if you've never been in a machine, I like to get in there and I actually like to try and break it. You know, a lot of people, you want to read the manual and everything, but it's also getting in and knowing what every single button does. Wheel loaders are a good example. In the Komatsu loader, you can shift it two different ways. There's either a shifter on the side of the steering column or there's one on the right joystick. Most operators using the joystick one. Well, with that, there's actually, if I have this to switch to engage, this is over on my right, it's on right there. If I try and now get in the machine and shift, it's going to beep. And it's going to keep beeping until I go back to using this shifter. That's what it's set up to, and vice versa. If that's not on and I try and use the shifter here, it's going to beep at me and it won't work. So that's why key to know that. The other is understanding like traction control is another good one. There's a ride control that's a switch down here that will basically adjust your hydraulic up and down while you're going, so it kind of counteracts and makes it a little bit smoother. But the key here is just understanding what all the buttons do. I think for a new operator, there's sometimes they don't want to ask questions. And that's where you're going to look like an idiot if you get out there and don't ask the question. So you know what the machine's doing, because I've had one too many operators come in, why can't I get this in gear? The other very basic one is understanding why the machine won't start. You know, if it's in gear, if the parking brake's not on, simple things like that can make you look really dumb, and it's a simple fix. So you don't want someone else to come up and figure that out. So making sure you're all in neutral, everything's set. So that's some of the basics. So that last tip is just understanding the machine and making sure you are able to go through, and I won't look like an idiot there. And it's actually on right there, and now I'll be able to go. But knowing the machine and knowing the different buttons on there. So everyone, that was our top 5 mistakes that we've seen. There is a much longer list, but what we'd really appreciate is all the operators out there. Please comment below. What have you learned? What are some of the top mistakes that you learned while operating wheel loader? Please share those below. Thank you everyone for watching this video. Take care.